All right. And if anybody is new, just a couple of things. Let me jump back over here. And just want to point out this is our lab guide. And we're on this particular session 5 roles. So let me grab this link. And I'll put it into the meeting in case anyone needs that. One of the things that happens too is like it's kind of confusing if you are starting from now, and anyone that's joining or listening to this recording later, and if you're starting the labs from this point, if you go back to the beginning of the lab guide, it shows you the basics of using the Cisco sandboxes, and it also shows you how to use CML within the sandboxes so that you can change the topology. Some other information that you'll see as you go through these sections is at one point we switched gears to show Ansible Navigator, and I'm using the Instruct Labs from Red Hat. So that's a totally different environment, and it has directions on how to use that environment and how to set up your Ansible Navigator to point to the always-on routers that are available in the sandbox. So the difference is when we use the CML environment, we have a VPN, and typically I'll use that to demonstrate any of the connectivity that requires a topology, and that way you can have your own topology. So as opposed to like when I'm doing a demo, I'll use like AWS or whatever, but that doesn't give you access directly to equipment. So when you use that environment, it does require a VPN, and then you interact with this topology that's in the Cisco modeling labs. When we use the Ansible Navigator, I'm using the always-on Cisco equipment that doesn't connect to each other, but it does give you like different models of gear that we can connect to. And we'll do like one-off types of things that work like to a single router, but to demonstrate how to use the Navigator. So you'll see some of those labs. And then the third environment was an Instruct environment that has an AAP controller, which is the GUI. So if you're familiar with Tower, the controller is like the evolution of the Tower, and you can have access to one of those through the lab environment that's in the lab guide. So it'll show you like the link to connect to it, and it'll work for like an hour and a half or so. So you'll have some time to get in and become familiar and do the labs. But the thing that's across the board that's ubiquitous across any of these environments is when you start to use this lab guide, it's going to ask you to create a GitLab account, a free account. And in that free account, you're going to create a repo. And in that repo, you're going to save all of the playbooks, regardless, what environment we're using. You're going to save your playbooks into that repo, because in all of these environments, when they go away, so does your content, right? So anything you've created in the labs. So if you want to not have to rebuild your inventory every time and all that kind of stuff, then you're going to want to create that repo and follow the directions on how to use it. So in this particular one here, starting out, I've already did my prep work, so I can go ahead and jump into this. But if you're trying to follow this lab later, then what it's saying here is a really good example is March 17th. If you go back to section 2 further up in the lab guide, it's going to show you when we use the CML environment how to set up the jump box, or what they call the dev box that's available. It's a virtual machine that's available within that DevNet environment that you have a VPN to. And it has Ansible and Python and some other software installed on it, but it's really old and stale. So as part of like kind of bootstrapping their VM, I created a makefile. And when you run that makefile, it's going to update Ansible version that'll work with like the newer modules that we're talking about, as well as a Python that'll work, because I think their Python's like a 3.5 or something crazy, right? So it'll update those two things. And it'll run, and it'll take about like almost 10 minutes to build everything. So in the beginning, when you get one of those environments, you can have them for like 4 hours. So the first 10 minutes, just let that run, that script, and then go to your CML, and you're going to update the topology. So the topology is in a Ansible4Networking repo. And if you go to like the first section, it talks about that. But once you download the topology file, it's a YAML file. and have it local on your machine that you're going to use for studying, then it's going to be that same file. So you'll just keep uploading that file into your CML, and then that'll update your environment. And another thing that you'll have to do, just note that it only has so much memory allotted for you in CML. So in order for you to have enough to bring up your new topology, you have to turn off the existing default topology. And it'll explain how to do that. It just takes a couple minutes to turn the one off and let the other one start up. And then you'll have everything up and running, and then you'll be able to do whatever labs that depending on where you are in the study guide. But if you're further along, then you just have to pull down your specific my project every time from the repo. And that's also a part of this make file. So for the make file to work, you have to do this environment variable before you run it that has your GitLab username. So that's the username when you first set it all up and create your repo. So it'll use your username because in the script, what it's going to want to do is clone down your specific one. Otherwise, you're cloning down mine. So you want to clone down your specific my project, and you'll pull that down. And then once all those other things complete, you're ready, to then subsequently do whatever lab you're working on. So this one here, we're going to talk about creating a new role. So I've already pulled down here. I have my project, right? And up here was all the other stuff, the script running, and it had to build all these things. So to save time, I'm already here, and I have my my project ready for me. I might have to reconnect to it because it timed out, but I have my VPN connected. So when you're SSHing, it's always the same address in the VPN. Developer at 10.10.20.50. And the password is always capital C1SCO12345. Right, so now I'm back. And I'll just go into that directory. And then I've got all my old configs, right? So some of the things that you're not going to want to do every time is keep creating an inventory. Also in your group bars, there's some specific information like on your, connection types and all that kind of stuff. So you're going to want to keep those in here. And then this Ansible for networking YAML is that topology for the CML, and I've already done that part. So the CML, if you haven't seen that part before, I still have that running over here. This is the topology. You've got 5 routers, so 2 switches actually, Nexus switches, and then 2 distribution routers, and then 1 core router. And then this would be consistent with like the complexity that you would see in like a certification test. It's not going to be too much bigger than something like this. So when I go into this, I mentioned you got to turn this one off because it has a firewall and a bunch of other stuff. So it's eating up like most of the RAM. So once you disable this one and then run this one after you import it, then you're good to go. So mine's already up and running. So I should be able to run playbooks against these devices. But I'm not sure like what it wants me to do. So let me kind of move this over and then bring up the lab guide. So this is that section here. Section 2 goes in more detail on how to do everything that I did. So just note that. All right, so creating a new role here. So I'm going to make a new group vars core router. All right, so I might not have that already. Let's see. Or yeah, I don't have one for core router. So and is it just core router or core routers? Core router. Where's it dash? Core dash router. And then I'm going to have an interfaces.yaml file. All right, so let me just grab, I'm going to save some time. I'm not going to type all this. The main thing is don't forget to save this stuff, right? Because otherwise you won't have it. Interfaces.yaml. And the reason why I'm using Vim is because the current version of this cert doesn't give you VS Code, but the newer one will. So kind of like when I'm on this jump box, I'm just using Vim, but I could actually point my VS Code through the VPN and use SSH to connect to this, and I could edit that way. But just to save some time to not have to set that up now, I'm just going to keep using Vim. All right, so now I have these interfaces configured for my group vars of core router. So in my inventory, I should already have a group for this. So what it wants us to do now is it wants us to create a role directory. So the way that we do that, I mean, you could manually do this, but the easy way to do this is to use the Ansible-Galaxy command line, and it'll initialize your folders for you. So we're going to go ahead and create a roles directory, and then create the actual role. So I'm inside of my project. Some of these warnings really don't mean anything because of the version of Python, but it still works. It's going to create the folder and everything. So I think tree is already installed on their jump box. All right, so now we have our core router interface dash description and all the same stock folders that typically you would have in a role. But the main one that we're going to care about, we're going to cheat. Like, we're not going to do everything we should do, like go in and put information for the metadata and all that kind of stuff. We only really care for these labs about the task. So that's where we're going to focus. We also have vars, but just note that these are just a place to contain kind of the default vars for a particular role, but they have a low precedence. So if you include the variables like in your inventory or in group vars or host vars or in a playbook, any of those will override variables that are set as the defaults for a role because it has a lower precedence. So just to point that out, that Ansible knows where to look for all these variables, but which one it decides to use is based off of the precedence. And extra variables would have the highest precedence. So if you do that, you override, anything or overrule anything that's already in there in terms of variables. So here it wants us to go ahead and create that main.yaml within the task. So these are the tasks that we would actually run as part of that role. So with that being said, I have to go into the role. It starts with core, and then task, main.yaml. And see how it added this comment by default. You'll see those comments at the top of the various YAML files with the name of the role. All right, so I'm going to paste this all in and make sure it looks good. Yeah, so it's all in there. So here we're using iOS_interfaces module. And you can see that this has a configure parameter where you can bring in, variables, kind of like we did with BGP. And then here we're using iOS command, which is similar to the CLI_command that was like that generic one that I used in the the BGP when I did that check at the end, but this is the one for iOS. So normally these are show commands. So here, that's what we're doing is we're doing a show command, and we want to see the description of the interfaces. So that's why we have the pipe, and we're including just a description. So it'll pull that back. It'll go into memory because we're registering it, right? So we're going to register that data that comes back as results. And then what we're going to do is we want to see it on the screen. So in standard output, we're going to just look at the standard output lines, so we don't see like that big blob of data that comes back that's unstructured. We just want to see the ones that just had line by line, so it's a little bit easier to read. It'll look more like the normal standard output is when we just run a command on a router. So that's what we're going to see come back. So let me go ahead and escape pound WQ, save it. Right, so now I have that role has information in it. So in order for me to use the role, I have to call it from a playbook. So we're going to create a playbook real quick. Right, and then let me grab that. It's real simple. We just need enough to read in the role, or in this case, we're installing the role, and I'll explain how we use roles, or different ways we use roles here in a second. There's different permutations of how we can do that. This should not be commented, so let's fix this real quick. All right, so we have to point to a group, right? So it's going to be that core router group that we created, which is just the one Cisco router at the core level. And then this is that role that we created. So we're going to install that role. So all the playbook is doing at this point is pointing to the target, this group. And then we're going to install the role. So whatever task are in the role is all that we're going to run, which is not always what we want to do. Sometimes we want to do things before we actually use the role or include the role or import the role. And sometimes we want to do things in the playbook after. So that's a different scenario that we'll do next, right? So right now we're just doing everything verbatim in terms of what's set up in that role. And then that's what output that we'll see when we run the playbook. So let me save this. And on this jump box, we're not using Ansible Navigator, so I have to use Ansible-Playbook. All right, so this is what I forgot to do right here. Right, or actually, it should be up here. If I want to install it, I don't have to explicitly add that. Let's see what's going on. Vim Ansible.cfg. We'll find out in a second if it works from this. It might just be something else I fat fingered. When you include roles, you definitely have to have this, or you have to like put the path to each role in the playbook. Oh, wait a minute. Let me make this bigger. That doesn't seem right. Where did I put it? Core router description. Yeah, I didn't put the YAML on the back of the end of that anyway. I think I jumped the gun there. Oh, we've got some stuff that's not installed. Going back to Paramico. So iOS underscore interfaces module config running config state. What did I put in there? Good Lord. Configure. This is iOS interfaces with an S. And that said, yeah, interfaces with an S, config, running config, and state. All right, so go back into here. That's just to the role. So I need to go into the role. Task. Main. Yeah, so somehow I fat fingered in the example here. Is this the one where I can edit? I'll come back to that. So this is, what page is this? Don't really show me the page, but yeah, I'll come back and I'll fix this. So if you do this one, I'll have it fixed here after the recording. But this is supposed to be config, not configure. But you can see from the error, it's pretty, most of them are pretty intuitive of what you did wrong. So it's config. All right, so anyway, we ran that particular role, and then we have the output. So this shows us the descriptions that are on the router that we ran it against, which is the core router. So now what we were going to do is make sure I'm in where I'm supposed to be, a little bit further down right here, include roles. So earlier I didn't need this. It just didn't run because I didn't put the .yaml on the back end of that command, Ansible playbook command. But include roles do need this, or in the playbook, you have to have the exact path to where those roles are. So it just depends on how you want to point to them. So in this case, it's just pointing from the ansible.config file to the roles folder that we created. So all of our roles need to go in that folder, or obviously it won't be able to find them. So now what we're doing is we're creating more roles. Let me hurry up and do this. I think there's not much left. I need to get a better mouse. Paste. There. ls rules. All right, so now I have those in there, but we don't have our main file on their task. So we have to, set all that stuff up too. So for this one, I have to do the group bars as well. I think I could just grab both of these. Do the I. So this will be for the distribution switches to define those interfaces. And the disk routers. So these are all going into these group bars. And the reason why it works at the group level, you may be wondering, is each one of those switches or those routers, they have the same connections. So it's like a like a connection standard as part of the naming standards and those types of things. So it's like gigabit Ethernet 1 is always management, 2 is going up to core on both of them. So like it's following that pattern. So that way I didn't have to do it at the host var level because it's the same for either of those devices. But it could have been at the host var level if we wanted to. All right, so now I'll go into those two roles and fix them up. Insert. Got me again with the stupid comment. There we go. Config, right? So this time it doesn't have configure. And the same thing here, it's got config. Well, let me do that. All right, so that's good. All right, so I have to make a playbook for these guys. This time you'll notice that the playbook has a lot more information than the role does. It's kind of we flip-flopped on this one. Insert. And I'll walk through why this is different. All right. So in this one, I have a task of, well, first of all, the groups, right? So we're applying this. We already did the core router earlier. So this particular playbook is applying these to the group of disk-dash switches and disk-dash routers. And under the task here, you can see we have include role. So the other one was installing the role. So it was just role, and then we would list out whatever roles that we want to run, but then it runs whatever tasks are in that role. This one still runs the task in the role, but we can do different things in the playbook. So we're including the role. I don't have to point to the role because we already used that parameter in the Ansible.config file that says all my roles are in the roles folder in my working, the root of the working project. Then change directories into roles. So we know where it is. So all of our roles are there. So it's just the name of the role. So this one for the switch interfaces will go in, and it's a condition, right? So it's only when that host inventory or host name in that inventory is in the group of disk-switch, right? So that condition would say to use this role. And then here in the next one is effectively the same thing, but now what we're doing is we want to apply the description, right? So we're using, or I'm sorry, we want to get the interface description. So we applied it from the role, and then we want to print it out. So what we're going to do is run a show command and then register the results, and then we're going to print it out using the debug parameter. So all of this has the same conditions, right? It's all for the switches. So disk-switch, you'll see on each one of these. And then when we get into the router, it's pretty much the same thing, but it's applying to the router group. But you'll notice that we're including role, but then we're also, at this level, we're running playbook commands because these are separate tasks, right? So we're not running these within the role. In the first role, we did that. The actual debug and all that was a part of the role. So all we did is we pulled it out of the role and brought it into the playbook. And there's a whole notion, like you can run playbook commands before a role and after. So depending on how you want to set up your task. So it just gives you different options in that regard. So the include role is good too. Like if you want to iterate through particular task, like with nested information and things, sometimes it's a lot easier doing it this way with include role. So you'll see it applied differently based off of what you're trying to do with how you're interacting with playbooks in and out of your roles. So that's what we have here. So I should be able to run it, and hopefully everything is good. Run this playbook. Okay, so switches are almost done. And you can see the conditions is why we can see skipped, because we're not doing the routers when we're doing the switches. And then it printed out the descriptions on the screen for the switches, 1 and 2. And then now it should do the same thing for the routers. It'll just go in the order that we have it in the playbook. Each task is done one at a time. You can set a parameter so that you don't see the skipped host on the screen too. You can ignore that. That's something that you can override in the ansible.config file. But for this one, we just left it like this so we could actually see it happen and understand how conditions work. All right, so everything was okay. And that is the end of this session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my work by running these git commands so that my project will have all of this new role information in it the next time that I bring it up. So if you get into this lab, or really anywhere you stop in the lab, just make sure that you do the same thing, that you commit, like you're going to add your changes into your repo and you're going to commit them and then you're going to push them. And just remember to use your username so that your local Git repository knows who you are in relation to what you're going to push into the remote origin. And then you'll be able to save it that way. But since we went over a little bit on time here, I'm going to go ahead and do this on my own. And I've had this recorded in previous sessions too. If you go back, you'll see me saving it. Most of the time I remember to do it during the session. But this time just to call that out so that you don't forget. But before I jump off, let me see if anyone's still here. Oh, God bless you. There are a couple folks. Do you guys have any questions or anything before I drop off?
Nope. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Todd. All right. Well, I'll see you on the next one. Most likely the next session will be a recap of Cisco Live, because I'm going to go to Cisco Live before the next session, which means the session will actually be a little bit later. It'll be probably pushed out some because of that. But I'll have like all the updates from Cisco Live and also all the updates from the Ansible Fest that ran as part of the Red Hat Summit this week. So I'll kind of combine the best of everything that's network automation, and that'll be the first half of that session. We'll cover, everything that's near and dear to my heart, which is the network automation pieces. So hopefully you have a good rest of your day, and I'm going to go ahead and shut this down. Manage that.